Hello and welcome! In this video I wanted to take a look at a Death Guard list, as it's been a little time since we've taken a look at one of them. And with that being said, let's dive right into how this list did. This list came 3rd place out of 11 players in a 5-round tournament, played by a player named Sororitas, and sorry if I got that wrong anyway, in the Battle of the Bay 2022, held on December 10th, 2022. And this tournament was held in South Africa. And I think that's the first list we have from South Africa and the continent of Africa to begin with. And that's quite exciting to see, as it really does show how much of a worldwide game Warhammer 40k really is. And with that being said, that might be a smaller sized tournament, but hey, everyone starts out somewhere, and most tournaments you're going to probably see are going to be around the 10 to 20 player mark, and not the 50 player tournaments that we sometimes cover. In any case, I will say also this, that this Death Guard list did suffer a little bit because there were a lot of armored lists within the meta, so it's kind of interesting, and we'll go more into depth about that once we conclude taking a look at this list. And with that being said, let's dive into the list itself. This list is composed of a single battalion detachment, being composed of the Inexorable Plague Company. This is a rather popular one and a rather common one we see. However, this list does utilize some units we haven't seen in some time, and kind of brings back an old school flavor of Death Guard list that has gotten some upgrades going into the new meta of the Nephilim edition. So let's take a look at the HQ choices that this battalion detachment begins off with. The first of the HQ choices is one that's somewhat popular, however has mostly been sidelined since the changing of the chapter approved. This HQ choice being Typhus. And Typhus is pretty much a beefed up Lord of Contagion combined with a Psyker, giving himself a lot of power. However, he does tend to be a little clunky compared to something like a Nurgle Demon Prince. However, he does have his place, and he can do quite a lot of work for his points cost. And with that being said, Typhus does know 2 different psychic powers, as he is a Psyker, in addition to that Lord of Contagion profile that gives him contagion benefits, as well as a rather brutal melee profile. The first of those psychic powers is known as Miasma of Pestilence. Miasma of Pestilence is a popular psychic power that says when successfully manifested, you select a friendly unit within 18 inches, and enemies targeting that unit get -1 to hit to their hit rolls. A rather good option, and one that can make your already durable Death Guard units all the more durable. As for the second psychic power, it's a more offensive one, being Curse of the Leper, which says when successfully manifested, you select the closest visible enemy unit within 18 inches, and you roll 7d6, and for every roll that exceeds that unit's toughness, that unit suffers 1 mortal wound. Truly a great way to take care of swarm-style units, and can be incredibly brutal in the right situations. And with that in mind, I do think it's a rather powerful psychic power to have on a Typhus, who can be rather powerful against stronger enemy units due to his melee profile, as well as what units he's usually accompanied with, so it's a good little balance to give yourself just that little more ability to take out those swarm-style units, even though Typhus can still be rather effective against swarm units within melee combat as well. And with Typhus being covered, we can move on to the second HQ choice for this battalion detachment. The second HQ choice is a low-cost option, or as low-cost as Death Guard has, being a Malignant Plaguecaster, once again being given 2 different psychic powers, and the first psychic power is once again Miasma of Pestilence. However, the second psychic power is a bit different, being Putrescent Vitality, and Putrescent Vitality is a rather powerful ability that says when successfully manifested, you select a friendly Death Guard infantry within 18 inches, and that unit adds 1 strength and 1 toughness to their unit profile. That's a rather powerful ability that can really hypercharge a unit of your choice, giving them the ability to cross over some strength thresholds, thus making their melee profiles that much more deadly. And considering Death Guard already have incredibly deadly melee profiles, it's a rather good bonus to have. The toughness also makes them that much more durable, and combined with the Miasma of Pestilence, you can really make a unit incredibly hard to kill for your opponent. In either case, that concludes the 2 different HQ choices for this battalion detachment, and as you can see, the player has chosen to not really include any relics or traits for those 2 different HQ choices. With the HQ choice being covered, we move on to the troop choice of this battalion detachment. As this battalion detachment includes 3 different troop choices, all those troop choices composed of the Poxwalkers. The first of those units is a unit of 20 Poxwalkers, the second is a unit of 18 Poxwalkers, and the third is a unit of 10 Poxwalkers. As you can see, those first 2 units are rather beefy in numbers, but the last one is just kind of a filler unit with only 10 Poxwalkers. And for the troop unit, you have a total of 48 models, coming in at only 240 points. That's a rather good price point, and do consider that the Poxwalkers, although they're not the most threatening or the most powerful units, they can still do a decent amount of damage depending on what stratagems you use, as they do have access to different stratagems, such as the one that allows them to deal mortal wounds while taking out some of their own number, although that's a perfectly fine price to pay, as anything you'll be dealing mortal wounds to is usually going to be a much more expensive target than the Poxwalkers that you'll lose using that stratagem. In either case, it's good to see a list utilizing a heavy amount of Poxwalkers and opening up other slots within the list. For the most part, the Poxwalkers have fallen off a bit to the wayside due to the increased power of Plague Marines that we've seen within the Nephilim chapter approved, as all the different war gear has been free on those Plague Marines, and as such, they kind of push the Poxwalkers out of the meta, with the occasional Poxwalker showing up within different lists. However, this list did choose to go with a large number of Poxwalkers, as they're still a rather cheap choice, and a rather effective one that allows it to use a lot of other unit types within a list. When with the troop choice covered, we move on to the elite choice of this battalion detachment. The elite choice is where the majority of this battalion detachment takes place, as the Death Guard are a rather elite army. The first two choices within the elite slot are both units of Blightlord Terminators, and the Blightlord Terminators are a very durable unit that's incredibly powerful and has a good array of choice of different weapons, but in this case, they've been kind of taken as kind of minimalistic units as well. And with that being said, the first unit of Blightlord Terminators is composed of 7 Blightlord Terminators, while the second unit is composed of 6 Blightlord Terminators. Most likely this is simply because of points cost, and as you'll see, there's a lot of units like this within the list, and it's most likely a mix of balancing points as well of having slightly bigger units for situations where you need it, while you have the slightly smaller unit for the situations where it's good, giving you a little bit more versatility without necessarily going too hard or too heavy on one unit or the other. That being said, both these units are armed in a very similar way, with both units being given a single flail of corruption, and all of the Terminators besides the one carrying the flail are armed with a Bobotic Axe and a Combi Bolter. This is a rather minimalistic arming style, pretty much used to keep the points low on these units of Terminators. I will say it might have been kind of interesting to have 2 flails in one unit, maybe making concessions in other parts of the list to bring up that first unit to 10 Blightlords, and usually when seeing Blightlord Terminators, I do like giving them something like a Blight Launcher or a Reaper Autocannon, as it can give them a little more versatility and give Death Guard that extra bit of firepower that they sorely lack in most situations. However, this list does focus very heavily on melee, so it's very evident that it was a very conscious choice not to really go heavily on the different special weapons, and rather to go into kind of a bulk list where you have a ton of different options and a ton of different units that all kind of fulfill a similar role, so that you can overwhelm an opponent that might be a little more diversified and not necessarily ready for a list such as this. Anyway, with that being said, we move on to the third and fourth elite choice for this list. Those elite choices are 2 units of Deathshroud Terminators. These units are composed of a unit of 5 Deathshroud Terminators and a unit of 4 Deathshroud Terminators. Both these units are not given any upgrade except that the champion has double Plague Spirit Gauntlets, giving him a little more ability to clean out swarms, though really with large units such as this, you're not going to really have that much difficulty with those swarm style units. However, those Deathshroud Terminators are definitely great options to include within a list, and they're one of the more cost-effective Terminator units. In fact, they've kind of overtaken the Blightlord Terminators in most lists, as they're a little more focused in what they do and they can put out a little more damage. However, that being said, the Blightlords definitely still have very much a place in the game, and I think they've been kind of overlooked in many situations simply because of the power of the Plague Marines in the recent chapter approved edition. That being said, I also think that the Deathshroud Terminators make a great accompaniment to that Typhus that you include within the list. And as you can see, instead of going with Plague Marines, this list chose those 4 units of Terminators, bringing the elite of the elite to the Death Guard forces, and having a massive swarm of Poxwalkers to really give them enough board presence to really make any opponent kind of afraid of what's going to happen to their forces. However, the elite choice does not conclude with those Terminator units, because there is a 5th elite choice, being a Tallyman. And the Tallyman is always a great choice to have, as he does make your units much more consistent and does give you access to additional command points in a meta where command points are definitely at a premium. In any case, this Tallyman has actually been given a Warlord trait, in this case the Warlord trait being the Ferric Blight, which is unique to the Inexorable Plague Company. And the Ferric Blight is a unique contagion that can be taken on a single unit, which says that while an enemy unit is within the contagion range of this contagion, anytime a friendly Inexorable model makes an attack against that unit, the attack's armor penetration is improved by 1. This means that your attacks are going to be hitting all the harder, and if they're being tallied for by that Tallyman, they're going to be all the more accurate. In addition to that, don't forget about the Outbreak Stratagem that allows you to spread this contagion onto a different unit, giving you even more coverage of this rather powerful ability. And I will say this is an incredibly good reason to go into the Inexorable Plague Company, as you can really take some of that mid-range output that the Death Guard have and really bring it up to a new level, giving them a lot more ability to deal with armored targets. There's one additional choice that could be considered an elite choice, however this one utilizes no force organization slot, as it is another voted Varion. This voted Varion is a foul Blightspawn, which is to be expected within a melee list such as this. This foul Blightspawn has been made the warlord of this army list and has been given a trait, a relic, and a deadly pathogen. The trait that this foul Blightspawn has been given is the Contaminator, and the Terminator is simply an aura trait that says friendly Plague Company units within 6 inches can reroll the wound roll on melee attacks, and they can do the same with ranged plague weapons if they're within 12 inches of their target, giving you all the more versatility. In either case, I think the Terminator is rather powerful, especially when you consider those units of Deathshroud Terminators, as well as the Blightlord and other units that we'll see within this list. Really, it makes your units that much more consistent, and with the additional armor penetration of the Tallyman, as well as other benefits that the folded variants provide, you really end up in a situation where you can be very consistent with how much you output with your different units. As for the relic on this foul Blightspawn, that's another rather popular one, being the Revolting Stench Vats. And the Revolting Stench Vats are definitely an upgrade that any melee army wants to have, as it allows him to more efficiently make enemy units fight last within melee combat, thus allowing you to get the Alpha Strike and take out enemy units before they can attack in return and take out any of your units. As for the Deadly Pathogen, it's once again one we very commonly see on the foul Blightspawn, this one being the Viscous Death. And the Viscous Death gives him that one additional point of strength on his Flamer style weapon, bringing it up to a new threshold and allows him to reroll randomly generated number of attacks whenever he makes attacks with a randomly generated plague weapon. In this case, he has a very powerful Flamer type weapon that does have a random number of generated attacks, and considering how inexpensive the Viscous Death is in terms of points, it's definitely an ability you want to include whenever taking a foul Blightspawn if you have the points available, and one that you usually want to make room for just because of how powerful and consistent it makes this unit, in addition to all the different benefits that the foul Blightspawn offers to your melee units. There's also some argument to be made for something like a Biologist Putrefier, however this list does not include one, and that's perfectly fine as well, as it's one of those units that you do have to decide whether or not you want it to include, but I think in a list such as this, it definitely would have had a decent enough home, but the player has chosen to go with different options and did perfectly fine within the tournament, so it's more of a mood criticism than anything in specific, and based on the other lists I've seen, I don't think the Biologist Putrefier would have really changed how this list performed in the long run in terms of how things went. Anyway, with that non-force organization slot covered, we conclude with the elite choices for this battalion detachment, and we move on to the final unit type within the battalion detachment. The final unit type is yet again focused on melee combat, and that is a fast attack choice, consisting of 3 different fast attack choices. All these different fast attack choices consist of a single folded bloat drone armed with a flesh mower, and the folded bloat drones are definitely a very powerful force with a rather low points cost and can be absolutely brutal within melee combat when using that flesh mower. And as such, this concludes all of the different unit types within this list. So let's take a look at this list and what could have been done differently and what maybe hurt it within the tournament, as well as what it does really well. As you can see, this list is incredibly melee focused with those units of Deathshroud Terminators, Blightlord Terminators, the folded bloat drones, the Typhus, and even the Poxwalkers, as all of them do incredibly well within melee combat. Not to mention that the different folded variants within the list also help very heavily in supporting those different units, so this list does have a very singular focus, and it can really take advantage of opponents that aren't necessarily ready for such a durable list with so many models on the table that can be so aggressive within melee combat. So anytime you go up against an opponent that might be vulnerable to such a list, you're pretty much going to dominate them, and you're going to have an incredibly good time against other melee armies, as all of the different Death Guard benefits, as well as the ability to put out an insane amount of melee damage with this list is definitely going to make it hard for other melee armies to really compete with you when going into melee combat, as you're going to have a lot of ability to counter anything that they do. That being said, you are a little bit of a slow army, however, those folded bloat drones do definitely give you a lot of mobility. So where does this list kind of falter a little bit in terms of what it might have had a little bit of trouble dealing with? Well, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, the tournament did have quite a good amount of elite style lists that had a decent amount of armor. For example, the first place list was a 1000 Suns list that did include the Demon Primarch Magnus and included a Forge Fiend, thus giving itself a lot of powerful units, and the 1000 Suns are incredibly durable, as well as being able to put out a lot of mortal wounds, thus bypassing a lot of the durability of the Death Guard forces. The second place was a League of Votann list with a double land fortress, and the fourth place list was an Imperial Titans list. As you can imagine, both those lists have a decent amount of armor, with the Titan list having an incredible amount. So for the most part, the thing that probably hurt this list the most, as even though it had some ability to deal with armored targets due to different buffs from the folded variants, as well as a heavy hitting profile on those Deathshroud Terminators and the Typhus, as well as the buffs from the Malignant Plaguecaster, it probably still struggled a little bit with something like Imperial Knights and even those land fortresses from the Leagues of Votann. So all in all, the reason I think the list kind of placed where it did, which was 3rd place out of 11 players, I think a lot of it was due to the meta and less about the list being bad in itself, as the list does have a lot of potential, it just has to face the right opponents. That being said, there were a decent number of orc players and other such armies within the lower half of the tournament, so this list probably got the majority of its points from those different battles, and that's probably what it was looking to counter. However, with that being said, I think if this list included something like a couple Plague Burst Crawlers, which is pretty much the only ranged anti-armor options that the Death Guard have, or even something like the Mephitic Blight-hauler, which is a little bit of a closer range but has that nice multi-mounted profile, then it might have had a little bit of an easier time with some of those more armored lists. In addition to that, even something like the Plague Marines armed with melta guns and other things like that in a big enough number could have definitely put some damage onto those armored lists, and having that range on those Plague Burst Crawlers could have assisted with some of the Thousand Sun forces, as Magnus the Red is definitely a vulnerable unit if he can be targeted down due to his nature being a glass cannon. However, if you have to engage with him in melee, it does become a lot harder, as it does give the Thousand Sun player a lot more ability to screen his Magnus the Red, thus allowing the glass cannon to do a lot more work throughout the game, as opposed to being taken out early enough where he doesn't cause as much of a problem. In any case, I think the list is good, and I think it's interesting, and in the right metas, it's definitely going to be a list that can dominate the tournament, but in many situations, there's also definitely room to improve and make it a little more diversified and a little more versatile. However, that being said, if you do enjoy playing this heavily focused list, don't let that criticism stop you, because as you can see, this list did do perfectly well within the tournament, and if maybe the games went a little bit differently, it could have still placed within the second or first place very easily if it just had a little bit of luck, or maybe played a little more tightly. But in either case, I do like the list, and I do like that it brings kind of that old school style of Death Guard play back to the table and really showcases what it can do. Anyway, as always, thank you for watching, and for those who did stick around to the end of the video, I do have a little bit of an announcement to make, and that's that I've actually started up my own website, which is linked in the description down below. This website is currently a store where I sell different Warhammer 40k stuff, as well as collectible card games such as Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, and other card games. I will be expanding my different product lines and hope to become more competitive with some of my pricing as time goes on, but currently I think my pricing isn't that far out from what you can find in other places, but it's not necessarily the best pricing you'll find in the world. In either case, I think it's a good way if you want to support the channel and you want to support the content while buying models. Do check it out and do give it a look. Please do keep in mind this is the beta launch of the website, and I'll be making a full announcement video when I feel a little more ready to do so. In any case, check out the store, let me know if you find any bugs, and if you feel like purchasing anything, feel free to do so. However, do keep in mind I only ship within the 48 states of the United States, so if you live outside of those 48 states, sorry, but I can't really do much for you at this time. So in any case, thank you for watching, have a great day, and see you next time. Bye.